Hey, what's going on? It's Mel. Thank you for another moment of tuning in with the Empowerment LLC YouTube channel. I hope that the conversations that we have had so far have really helped you, have really caused you to grow. I'm asking right now, before we go any further, that you take a moment and subscribe to the channel. We want to see your comments on all the videos. Take a moment to go through the inventory. We have some really good stuff. Subscribe, like, comment, forward it to a friend that you know will really be enlightened or helped by this conversation. You can follow the business also on Instagram at Epowerment LLC. If you want to receive motivational quotes every day from the company, all you have to do is text Epower LLC to 347-765-1741. Epower LLC, one word, to that number, 347-765-1741. And you'll receive information on the business. You'll get motivational quotes every day, all that good stuff. All right. Thank you so much for taking time to tune in. I'm so excited about this conversation. I want to bring in my guest for the day, none other than Anthony Booth Jr. Brother, how are you, man?
Well, thank you so much.
I'm good. So just so people have a quick history, Anthony and I, we worked together at a company a long time ago. And one of the things that always caught me about Anthony was you were always one of the most upbeat people in the building. Very rarely did we see you not smiling. Never really did we ever see you walking past not speaking. That's something that always stuck in my mind. Even like when I remember you to this day, I was telling my wife, I'm like, yeah, this guy was always just a ball of positive energy. I was like, I definitely had to bring you in for this conversation. I've been following you on Facebook and seeing how interactive you are with everything that's going on. So I'm really excited to pick your brain and see what you got to say about all these topics that I have.
Thank you.
No problem, man. So I want to start here. With everything going on right now, right? We saw the horrific act of what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and young Elijah McClain. But at the same time, we saw our generation, a younger generation, really hit the streets and protest. My question to you is, we've always experienced this. This is nothing new. What happened to George Floyd and what happened to this has been going on from Emmett Till days and even before that. What made the difference this time around? Why do you think people all of a sudden hit the streets, all of a sudden protested? What makes it different?
Oh man, I think it's a couple things. There's an unfortunate momentum, kind of to what's going on here. And I mean that to say, like, we're now experiencing this new age where, everyday people have a little bit more control over the narrative, right? So you have the Twitters and things of the world that allow us to kind of speak our own voice, right? To make something news because we watch it a million times, right? And a news station could try to ignore that, but that's news, right?
Right.
And so, George Floyd is it's a mountain among many hills and other mountains, right? As far as these stories of unfortunate unarmed and armed African Americans getting killed for not either A, not violating the law, or B, violations of the law that don't equate to execution. So and regardless, that's not what police are, there to do, right? So even if that's how, a state's would then decide how to prosecute someone, that's in the hands of the prosecution and not actually, police officers. But that's a different story. But I think, it's a momentum thing, right? It's a momentum thing, right? There's an unfortunate momentum that this is continuing to happen. It's happening on a global stage. It's happening on an international stage. Everyone is watching. Yeah, there's something about the kneeling on the neck for as long as he did, kind of what's very obviously kind of intentional negligence around someone's body, and that's an issue.
Yeah, you say obvious, like what was happening was obviously wrong, but there are some people who at this point still tried to justify what happened to George Floyd. And I think there's a lady who writes for SNL. I think her name is Sam J. And she said, you guys realize that we're not asking for anything extra. We're just really asking for you guys to treat us like we're human. And that really resonated with me, where they're like, you want special privileges, you want this. No, we want the same privilege. We want to be able to walk out in the street and not have to worry about returning home. You know what I mean? So you said something so key. Social media was a big part of what's going on. And I think a lot of times we can view social media as a bad place, very toxic. Just alone what the president is doing on Twitter has made social media extremely toxic. What is the effect of social media on the mindset or the way the media covers what's going on in the world right now also? Do you think they are guilty of sort of writing the way we should feel? Like, do we have to wait for social media? Because the truth of the matter, Ant, is that a lot of people only get their news from social media. And I know that sounds silly to people who are watching, but it's the absolute truth. Is that it's not real unless they see it on their Facebook feed.
Right.
So what role does social media play on the way we think?
That's one of the things that we're studying in psychology, how all of this is playing into how humans as social beings, are interacting positively and negatively. But yeah, I mean, there can be a lot of issues around getting your news from something like social media. And the main issue would be kind of the science of algorithms, the fact that companies like Facebook are designed to get users to interact with their interface. Yeah. And the way that they get users to interact with their interface is they find ways that their users enjoy their interaction. Wow. Unfortunately, and this is science too, people are drawn to stuff they already kind of agree with, right? And people are drawn to kind of radical ideas. People are drawn to conspiracy theories. People are more likely to, if you type into Google, is the Earth, right? It's not going to say round, it's going to say flat, right? And then and that leads to all other right things. There's kind of a propensity for humans to like conspiracy, and these companies prey on that, right? So they kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. And the issues with that is that this information is not necessarily vetted, right? So even the news can be slanted, but at least there's a vetting process that, like, right. If you're watching NBC, if you're watching CBS, if you're watching Fox News, there's a vetting process, right? At least to hearsay what they're saying, the information that they're using, that you can go back and you can say, okay, is this true or is this a lie? That should be a part of these corporations. Whereas Facebook, there's nothing. I can just go on Facebook and create a feed that says, you know what so-and-so said, do you know what Republicans are trying to do? They're trying to do this. And, I might feel that way, but if that's not true or accurate, that can still be detrimental in the sharing of misinformation and the inability for us to kind of accurately articulate ourselves in a world to know what we're up against if we don't truly know if we're operating with misinformation.
Do you think the fix is regulating these social media platforms? Like, whose responsibility is it? Is it our responsibility to make sure that the information is correct, or should there be some type of police? Or do you view that as an infringement on the freedom?
I'm going to say both. And here's the deal. Ideally, we would be people that would just look at misinformation and want to know if it's true or not. Exactly. Ideally, you'd look at something and be like, exactly. I feel this way. But is this right? Let me check, right? And we don't really have a habit of doing that. And that may be something, as we continue to educate our youth, that we give them the process of that, right? Like, you've got a genius box in your hand that you can look up unfathomable knowledge, right here in your hand. And you encounter something, you have the ability to kind of decipher whether or not that's accurate or not with just a little bit of research. Right. Ideally, we'd be able to do that ourselves. We vet that stuff out. We wouldn't be sharing it.
Right.
But we do. We also have the negative incentive of companies or countries wanting to buy, misinformation and then sell it to us, right? So like they want to buy that and to make sure that gets on our feeds. Hey, I want every liberal to see this ad. I want every conservative to see this ad. And they might be trying to manipulate our behavior with that stuff psychologically. And that's troubling, right? Yeah. So, there is a little bit of responsibility these companies have. If you're going to make, that much money, you have the resources to do that. If you have the resources to look into the psychology of whether or not we're going to click, right? Whether or not we're going to buy, whether or not, if you have those resources, then you also have the resources to put a little bit energy into whether or not this is true, right? Whether or not this information is accurate, right? If I can't post naked pictures, because there's okay, then let's also prohibit lies.
Right. Exactly. And I think there's a really dope documentary out on Netflix. I think it's a Social Experiment. But when I watched it, it really sort of gave me an aha moment when it's like, Anthony, everything that we see on our feed is because they want us to see it.
Yes and no. I mean, and I say that to say, like, the science of it is that my behavior guides what I end up seeing, right? It's because I click, I like, I don't like, I this, I that, I follow, unfollow. That's going to guide it a little bit, right? My feed isn't the same as yours just because they want us to see the same things, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, right.
It is designed to sell to us specifically. It is designed to get the individual users to interact, and it's pretty smart at doing that. I will say though, like, there is a little bit of an issue with how we interact with it and how readily we are to believe information that validates what we already believe.
Right.
And, truth is truly both subjective and objective, right? It's objectively true. If I drop this pin, it's going to fall. That's true. Right.
Yeah.
But it's not objectively true that, that life has meaning. Right. So like, at a certain point when we're monitoring for truth, right? So when I say like, oh, you should be able to X out lies, well, truth is subjective. You have to interact with, there's going to be some gray area where people are going to be uncomfortable on both sides, and we gotta make a little bit of room for that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's almost like the argument of who's going to measure truth. You know what I mean? Because my truth may not be your truth. Does it make it not truth because it's something that we don't agree on? So yeah, I see that. I see that point. Speaking of truth and fake news and all that good stuff, we talked about, and I spent some time talking about social media because I think that social media was really heavy in this movement. I think the reason why the movement grew so big was because people were able now to actually see in real time how it was happening and what we could do to sort of like help. But we saw the White House, we saw the current administration, right? And this is not a Trump bashing stream. But we saw the current administration, the current leadership in our country sort of bash protesting. Really, really villainized it, really made it seem like people were out looting, people were out just killing each other, shooting each other in the streets. What do you think the purpose of them characterizing the protest part of it was?
I mean, the purpose is the same as it has always been. You can look back in, newspaper ads of 1905 and 1910 of riots that would happen after police, shoot a young kid or something like that. And they crop up in Harlem, they crop up in different parts of the country. And, they're saying the same things. They said the same things about Martin Luther King. So, the idea is here, they're not comfortable with the narrative, right? Like if you're not looking to change anything, right? If the idea of the movements, right, are to inspire change, then you want to make sure that people aren't moved by that, if that makes sense, right? Like the idea is if you villainize that, then now all of a sudden you create this oppositional mindset. And even with the oppositional mindset, you create a lot of people in between, right? You get a lot of people that go, I like, I don't like, I like, I don't like. Well, that's not helping a movement that says, hey, we need to do something, if that makes sense, right? So if you have all these people that are going, I kind of agree with the protests and I kind of don't, and but I wish they would this and I wish they wouldn't that, then that's certainly not helping the movement of like, hey, can we try to figure out some legislation so cops can't just kill people? You know what I'm saying? Can we figure out some legislation so, these things don't continue to happen? That none of that's part of the discussion as long as we're going, do I agree why they're there? Do I agree with what they're doing while they're there? If that makes sense. None of the discussion is now on why they're there.
Right. And then when you shift the focus on the violent part of it, then you ignore that there also were some moms who were peacefully protesting, who you guys sprayed. You know what I mean? There were some people who honestly were doing it for the right reasons who we sort of ignored. But you're absolutely right. It's to almost not be able to have the conversation that we need to have so that things could get better. Things can change. And I didn't want to make it a Democratic or a Republican issue, but really start to look at things as a human rights thing. Like, what's just right? You know what I mean? Regardless of your background, your social inability or disability or whatever type of money you make, focus on what's just right. What is right for the country? What is right for my neighbors? What is right for the people I love? And I think that, and tell me if you agree, I feel like what is right has sort of gotten lost in the country. Is that like, am I being like doomed? Am I being too like harsh?
I don't, I mean, right is subjective too, but I mean, I don't think that you're so far off in that, like, one of the things that I think is difficult about today's modern politics is that, what is very clear from the right political stance is the way that how they're going to approach things is that they don't care if they be called hypocrites, right? Like, they don't care. They don't care if in this hand they're doing this, and in this hand this doesn't make sense with that. If that's how they want to move and that's their position on things, they do not care. It doesn't matter that it follows the same logic, any of that. They have their stakes in the ground, and this is how they're going to operate, and they're going to try to push those agendas, and they don't care that one day they were saying you were bad for doing it, and today they're doing it. That doesn't happen at all, right? And so it's difficult to have a conversation with someone that doesn't really care about their position being right or morally correct. They don't care. That's their position. That's the thing. It's just like, okay, fine, but it doesn't matter. It's morally wrong to shut the borders. Okay, but I just think we should still. Well, how do you argue with that, right? So it's like, I think that's a different position that like we're used to dealing with in the country, where at least that was at least like a bartering chip, right? Like, are we morally right? Are we doing the right thing? Now people don't care. They don't care. Locking up kids, is that the right thing? No, but they shouldn't have come here. Their parents shouldn't have came across the border, blah, 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 blah. Their countries need to take them back, blah, 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 right? You're like, ugh, that's not nice. That's not kind. That's not right. And they're like, I don't care. Wow. That's my position, right? So I feel, maybe the bar shifted a little bit. Maybe that's not so much the focus, at least of a lot of people's positions. And they're also comfortable saying that they don't care. And then also that doesn't make them bad people. That doesn't make them racist. That doesn't, I don't care. Or they were still wrong. And, I'm still a Christian. I'm still everything I am. And I still feel good about myself. And my community supports me and other people believe like me. So I don't see what the problem is. Right. Right. I'm not going to win an argument with them to convince them that they're wrong. They've already made room for there to be some contrast. They don't care.
So are you saying that in actuality, there's absolutely no hope for someone to realize that they were wrong? I think that back in the day, there was a sense of bipartisanship where they talk about like Joe Biden and McCain, where they didn't agree, but they would come together to say, hey, what's right? How can we compromise? How can we both see how this will work for both sides of us? And I think that part is completely missing. And I think that's going to really catch up with the morality of the country. And I guess you're absolutely right. Where what can you do to convince them? But then it's like, what do we do if we stay silent? What also does that do? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think though, one of the things to think about is that the Republican or conservative politics is currently a politics of desperation. And I mean that to say that they don't have the numbers, right? Like, there's not enough conservatives to take over the liberal movement, right? The fact that the country's getting browner and, more brown and black people are populating and the average population of white people is going down. And, so they're holding on to these old institutions like electoral college and things like that, and manipulating things with gerrymandering and making sure that state and house legislatures and information like that is not part of our common education. And, there's a whole lot of stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff going on that kind of are acts of desperation, and kind of this like knowing that at a certain point there's not much they can do, right? Like that there's going to be enough people that are going to vote this way and feel this way that, you know, this is going to be the movement toward the country. And they're seeing that. They're seeing that now, you know, no state can ban marriage between, you know, gay people, right? LGBTQ communities are now more supported, you know, nationally. And so they're seeing that play out in real time, saying, oh, I'm very conservative. I don't think that that's right. I don't think this should be happening. And so that in real time, they're kind of seeing this playing out of the country shifting left. And they're acting a little desperately, you know, and I think that's where that plays in. It's not so much like, oh, can you prove them right? If they feel like at this point they have to do anything, by any means necessary, then that means by any means they're willing to play they don't care. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't let your justice through. So what? I'm pushing mine through. You know what I'm saying? Oh, but you did this. I don't care. You're a hypocrite. So what?
But now that you say it, though, that's absolutely the best way to describe it. Is we now see a group of people with one sort of mindset that have become desperate to make sure that mindset is always around. So that's absolutely, I've never even thought about it like that. It's desperate. It's just desperate and lost in the sauce also in the midst of protesting and all this stuff. This is what I really wanted to talk to you about, because I actually saw you sort of like engaging someone with facts about the Black Lives Movement. They were someone that we both know. You were kind of, I don't know what made you speak up or what happened, but you were sort of like, all right, enough is enough. That's not the facts of the situation. So I want to take a moment to talk about the misconceptions of the Black Lives Movement, because there are people, I've had conversations with people that say they instigate race relations. And I was like, okay, like I need some type of proof. Like, where did that come from? There are people who have called the Black Lives Movement a hate group, a terrorist group. So where do these misconceptions come from? And is this movement necessary for right now?
Well, first of all, is the movement necessary for right now? The answer is obviously yes. It was necessary for yesterday and last week, last year, 20 years ago. This is necessary. It's unfortunate. We shouldn't ever need to have said that, but we're coming from, where we're property, right? It's like the conversation around like, oh, well, some slave owners treated their slaves well is a conversation that would be the same as saying they also treated their pigs and their cattle well, right? They were slaves, like these, they treated them well. Okay, well, horse owners love their horses, right? But we're talking about human beings, right? The people that should have sovereignty and the ability to live freely and do what they want to do and work the jobs they want to work, right? Do the things they want to do, not be pulled to a different country. Come on, that's a whole nother side of the conversation. But as it relates to Black Lives Matter, it is I think first, let's talk about the context, the language, right? Black Lives Matter is in response to the viewing of African Americans being killed by police, right? And whether they are guilty of a crime or not guilty of a crime, we do not have a system that is set up to say that police get to just kill you. Right. That's just not the system, right? Like, so apprehend these people, please, if you need to, but killing them just seems to be a consistently not okay thing to do, which doesn't have any repercussions. That's an issue, right? Let's talk about it. So when we see that that's happening over and over again, and that there is no justice, or there's no, there is no repercussions, right? Then we say, okay, well, like you're treating us like our lives don't matter. So we're going to say Black lives do matter, right? Black lives matter, right? Don't treat us like we don't. Black lives matter, right? That is the context of the statement, Black Lives Matter. For anyone to say all lives matter would be like, we're missing each other. Sorry, we're not having the same conversation. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're not talking about all lives. That's actually the point. That's why we're saying Black Lives Matter, right? Saying Black Lives Matter is to state like, okay, you're treating us like our lives don't matter. So please put us in the category of lives that matter, please, right? That's what we're asking. It's a question, please, right? This is like a plea, right? It's not a, Black Lives Matter most, right? Black Lives Matter more, you know what I'm saying? But it's Black lives that matter now, right? Like
Right.
none of those, that's not part of it. It's Black Lives Matter, please. Can we, we love that, right? Can that, you know what I'm saying? If they matter to us, you know what I'm saying? Do they matter to you, please, right? And so,
man, that's so good.
That's an important first point, right? The idea, the context of that statement, when people miss that, I'm like, okay, you're having the wrong conversation, right? It's not Black Lives Matter now, Black Lives Matter more, Black Lives Matter most. It's Black Lives Matter, please. Black lives do matter. You know what I'm saying? Like, Black lives should matter, right? Like Black lives matter is to me, to us. They need to matter. They need to not be treated like they don't matter. Let's make that statement that they do, right? So that's the first thing. As it relates to the movement, I mean, no one is comfortable with protests. The whole point of protests is to make people uncomfortable. So if you say that these people are agitators and they inspire people to have conversations about race, like, oh, they push race, they do. That's the point. Let's just put that out there. They do. That's the point. If you're having a conversation about race now at your job with your coworker that's like, well, all lives matter, and you're like, well, okay, let's talk about that. That's the point. That's the point. Like, that's the point. If you're sitting in your car and you can't go down the highway because you're like, oh, Black Lives Matter people are there and this is making my life inconvenient. It's like, yeah, so is being dead. You know what I'm saying? So is like not being alive, or being afraid that you can drive through a neighborhood that's nice, or be afraid whether or not you should buy a house there because if you go jogging, yeah, that's inconvenient too, right? So why don't you just sit there in your car and be inconvenienced on your way to the store or work or whatever, right? That's the point, right? Like if you're like, oh, I'm annoyed, good. Thank you. That's the point, right? So that I can't apologize for Black Lives Matter. They're doing that on purpose. They're inspiring the conversations on purpose. They're annoying people on purpose. They're getting in the way. They're getting on the news. They're getting in people's zones where they'd feel uncomfortable on purpose. That's the point. And for good reason. As it relates to rioting and violence and so on and so forth, I don't condone any rioting and violence. At the same time, this stuff is not a response to nothing. And there's also enough odd evidence around, the idea, the perception of rioting and looting is like that African Americans are there with their anger and they're rioting and looting. And then you kind of see the playing out of this, and you're seeing the demographics don't always look that way. Things are a little odd. It makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't know enough to say, whatever, but all I am going to say is that, looters come to loot. Protesters come to protest. If you're going to interact, if you're going to talk about protesters, then talk about people that came to protest. If you want to say, I don't like looters, fine. But Black Lives Matter is not a looting organization. It's not like, hey, what we're going to do is show up downtown and we're going to hit the Macy's. That's not how that works. It's a protesting organization. They are organizing protests, and so they're protesters. That's not the same thing. Again, the point to try to demonize them or to tie those two things together is to distract from the conversation. If you want to distract the conversation, half of the job is done. You're uncomfortable. Half of the job is done. You're uncomfortable. You're thinking about it. Maybe you don't like it. Good. Good. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Why is this such an issue?
I'm so glad you brought up the whole all lives matter thing, because that's something that I've actually engaged in people. And it's always like, I heard of the scenario one time of Bill Maher was like, yeah, on a block where there's a set of houses and one house in the middle was burning. Yeah, of course, all houses matter, but the house that is burning is the house that right now deserves the attention. Because what eventually happens, if we don't take care of the house that's burning, it will catch the whole block of houses. That was like the most, when they said it, I was just like, yeah, that's probably the best way to describe this. And also, Black Lives Matter, they give the people a voice. They let people know. Like, I have 4 children, 2 boys. And I actually had to sit my 8-year-old and my 7-year-old down and go, hey, because of the color of your skin, things might be different. And that was something that, can I be honest with you, Anthony, sort of embarrassed me. Here is a country that they didn't have a choice to live here. They live here because I live here. I'm making them live here. And then in response, I have to then tell them that the place that I've decided for you to live can be a danger to you. You know what I mean? And that weighed on me really heavy. So I take the mischaracterizations of Black Lives Matter very serious, because they give us a voice in a time where where we need it the most. We need it the most. Well, not everything is black and white. Not everything is, but for the most part, a lot of stuff is. Well, we can never defeat racism. Okay, but we can also have conversations about it. I'm not saying we're going to eradicate racism in the country, because I always say this. I had this discussion with some young people from my churches. Racism is in the bloodline of America. It was founded on racism. It's in the bloodline. What can you do to change your blood type? Nothing. You get sick, you can treat your blood, but you can never change your blood type. And I'm just saying that I think America needs a treatment right now, a blood treatment of the things that we've okayed for a long time. And I think that's what Black Lives Matter does. They do. They sort of give a voice to something that's been okay for a little while. We almost got used to hearing about people dying in the streets. We almost got used to people being choked out in the streets. We got used to it. And Black Lives Matter, to me, they provide a voice. They provide this necessary treatment to the bloodline. I get a lot of arguments about it because people just think they're violent. But like you said, they're not a looting organization. that's not on their page. Like, come hang out with us. We're gonna hit the Macy's or we're gonna get some TVs. So yeah, that's absolutely, like you said, a diversion to not have necessary conversations. I don't want to keep you long. I just want this last question. I gotta ask.
Honestly, I got all the time in the world, bro. I got all the time.
Voter suppression, real or myth? People don't.
Is it real that they've tried to suppress the vote, or?
Is it real?
Yeah, I mean, that's so we can take that back to Reconstruction, right? So after slavery, African Americans were granted the right to vote in the South, because Republicans at the time were the abolitionist party. Yeah. They all voted Republican and became Republicans, and we had the very first senators, House of Representative members, and so on and so forth. And the whole South was Republican. But Republican as in like the Republicans were the liberal party.
Yeah, they were the Abraham Lincoln party back then.
Yeah, it was the party of Abraham Lincoln. It was the more liberal. It was the abolitionist party.
Yeah.
Dixiecrats were known as the ones that were for segregation and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, that's like the KKK picked up and was pretty much founded for the sole purpose of making sure African Americans stopped voting. And it worked. It worked. It worked. They were able to, right after slavery, African Americans were voting. They were able to do all this stuff all throughout the South. And then after that is when the KKK came in, X, Y, and Z. They had to get the military in. The U.S. military came in to try to stop the KKK. And eventually they didn't. The KKK didn't win against the military, but they pulled the military back. The KKK came back. They allowed for the South to start to set, these other rules, and the Democrats started to take over the South. And that state, the South was Democratic, Dixiecratic, as in like segregationist Democrats, up and until Lyndon B. Johnson, who's a Democrat, passed the Voting Rights Act, and then that flipped Democrats liberal, because all of a sudden Democrats aligned themselves with being the ones that are giving African Americans their rights back, and so they flipped to Republicans. Right. A lot of people don't know that story, but that's how old that stuff is. Like it's the idea that like they're trying to suppress our vote and how important voting is. They wanted to kill us to keep us from voting. They wanted to kill us to scare us to keep us to voting, burning crosses on our lawns, taking out our pastors, burning them up and hanging them on a tree to make sure that we didn't go to the courthouse to vote. That's how important it is. They know how important it is, right? I mean, they know it's that important. Yeah. So we need to understand it is that important. And the idea of the suppression, that's how deep it is. That's how they've tried to make sure that African Americans didn't vote and take any power or ownership of this country. Yeah. And we've started to do that. It does not make them comfortable. Yeah. Or people that don't feel comfortable with racial integration of the country, that makes them very uncomfortable. And, you see that, again, desperation. You see a lot of desperate moves being done to try to make sure that, to the best of their abilities, they're making it a little bit harder.
Right. So some of the ways they're doing it, right? So I want people who are watching this to understand that this is real. Like, this is not some type of thing about us making Trump look bad or the Republicans look bad. This is really happening. They are changing people's polls without letting them know.
Sure, they changed the polls. Even ID rules. ID rules are one of the first ones. Because IDs aren't cheap, right? We've all been to the DMV. How long does that take? Are DMVs readily accessible all the time? Are they always in the neighborhoods of communities of color where they can readily access them? Sometimes not, but sometimes not. And then getting to one, being there for hours, an ID might cost you $25, $45, right? To get. You have to have certain things, documentation to have them. That can, so all of these certain things can be barriers just to make sure, if someone can vote, cast a tally. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. What other things were you going to mention?
I was going to say that not only they're doing the polls, but the ballots. So they made it, okay, we'll send ballots to your house. They begin to limit the amount of ballot boxes in counties. Like, these are really things. Some polling places, they were removing machines so that people had to wait longer so that they would go home and not vote. Like, these are things that are really happening. Like, I want you guys who are watching to understand that we're not living in literal make believe land. Like, these are things that are actually happening every day. The amount of postal machines they removed from post office, that would be the machines that would sort our ballots. Like, these are all intentional methods of voter suppression. And we saw record numbers of people. I think they said something like 3 million people have registered, our generation type stuff. We've seen record number early voting in Georgia, Texas. So we need you guys to understand, go vote. Like, it is so necessary. We're not telling you who to vote for, but exercise your right to have a voice in this country, regardless of what you think is going on. Because people will tell you, oh, they're just telling you that they're trying to suppress your vote. There's no suppression. There's absolutely suppression in this country as far as voters. And Anthony just explained how far back it actually goes. I didn't even know it went back that far, but it's just bananas. It's just, sometimes it's just so discouraging. But we don't want you to be discouraged. We want you to vote. So.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, be encouraged, because the whole idea is, if you do have access to this, that's the kind of change you can make in your country, that they're willing to go through that extent to try to stop you from doing it. So just be that clear that the country is fully malleable. We can write any laws we want to. We can make 100 justices. We could abolish the Electoral College. We could say that the country has to go for president based on the majority vote instead of the Electoral College. We can nationalize healthcare and medicine and education. We could, defund the police. We could defund the military. We could reallocate those funds to science, to re-engineering, to jobs, to building things. We could do anything we want to with our country. It's fully malleable if we have access to it and we have knowledge and understanding of how to get involved. Without that, though, where you are just choosing, the idea of like you're choosing the lesser of two evils, especially if you have no knowledge, right? If you don't know much about what's going on, then what are you choosing? How do you know, right? Like, but the idea that this stuff doesn't impact your life, it does. Yeah. It does in very, very, very real ways. These things make huge impacts on people's lives, and I give a perfect example is a lot of the reasons we're talking about voter suppression attempts and why these things are actually happening. The reason why this stuff is happening is actually that the Voting Rights Act was not reestablished. Yeah. So when it came back up, they said, oh, we don't need it anymore. And that canceled a commission that specifically worked to make sure that states could not make laws that would infringe on voting rights. But now all of a sudden that commission's gone. And so states are doing what they want to, and people are trying to sue and get it up into the courts to try to, but then how much time do we have for that to happen, right? Again, these are all things that were done where people aren't paying much attention, and it's a lot. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, oh, this stuff is easy. You could spend your whole day reading about politics and what's going on. So I'm not saying that stuff is easy, but you could get involved a little bit. You could know enough to say, hey, at least as far as where I want this country to go, this is kind of the direction I'm looking for. These are the kind of people that are, kind of at least want more of what I want, and you can make your decision that way.
Yeah, and I think it's also important. Tell me what you think about making sure you receive, like you said, knowledge is so power. making sure you receive balanced information though, right? And my wife was the one who kind of like shares with me. Like, all you do is watch CNN. I'm like, yeah, I love CNN. She's like, yeah, you love CNN because they think like you. But you sometimes have to introduce other avenues. So expand. Even sometimes watch Fox News. See how the situation. See how.
Not sometimes. I mean, and here's the other thing. I mean, if you want to have intelligible conversations with people, you have to at least understand what they think, right? So, like, if you don't take some time to watch a little Fox News and get a little idea of like what their take is on this, then when you're interacting with someone and that's what they say to you, you're going to be like, what? You know what I'm saying? You're like, hold up, I didn't hear that. I don't. What are you using? But they heard that from a different news source that's a different take on it, right? And they have different information that they're going to use to try to back that up. You know, you need to have, like a good debater is going to do both research, right? That way that they can have an understanding of like what's going on. If you want to get involved in these conversations, it is important that you do both sides of the research. You have, an understanding of, where people think, and you'd be surprised. Maybe you realize that deepens your understanding of something. It might give you more of a feeling of why you believe what you believe, or sometimes it might shift you a little bit. You might go, okay, I can understand why people think that way, even if you don't.
Right. Yeah, I got you. With all that's going on, right? The craziness in the White House. This man, the man in the White House, he tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," and that developed a plan to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Liberate Virginia, and now they found that there were plans to also kidnap the governor of Virginia. With all this crazy language that's being used, and all of the people that are dying in the streets, where do we go from here? What should be our next step? Like, where should our minds be? How do we move forward in this?
What I can say is that as it relates to voting, as it relates to these sorts of things, I mean, it is true. It is our country. It is fully malleable. We do have the ability to, change things in real ways, right? It is going to make people uncomfortable. And I think that's part of it, right? And I think that's important. The country is making a lot of changes, right? For up until the country is established, people who were, homosexual could not get married, right? And that changed recently for better, right? That's a more equal system, but that's a change that after a long time of being one way, now we're this way, right? That's going to make people uncomfortable, and you're going to see opposition to that. You're going to see people kind of, push the opposite direction, but that shouldn't mean that we stop that goal of openness, right? That shouldn't mean that we stop, pushing for a country that's more accepting of people, and that we do that across the board. There is the only little piece of that is that you do need to be a little intolerant of intolerance, right? So you can't use that sword both ways. You can't say like, oh, well, you're intolerant of me if, I can't say, if I can't say that I don't want any, gay people to shop at my store, then you're intolerant of my views. Like, okay. we have to make a rule. There has to be a point where we say, okay, if we want to end intolerance, then we have to be intolerant of intolerance, right? We need to make sure that tolerance is the rule across the board, right? Everyone's got to be at least open enough to say, come on into my shop. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to like you. You can buy what you want.
Right.
So there's that, right? Like that's personally, and that's my belief, right? Certainly people are entitled to their own beliefs around that thing. But, as far as like, where do we go from here? I think that there's hope. And I think that the fact that we see people very divided gives us an inclination that the country is changing, and that it's possible that it can be changing for the better, and that everyone should be getting involved, right? This is the time for everyone to say, well, let me get a little bit more involved, because there's a lot that can change, and a lot of positive things that can happen in this country right now. And there's momentum for that. And that's why you're going to see things get a little ugly and a little nasty, in my opinion. Don't let that discourage you. It's like to say, what I have a saying around haters, like anyone who's got haters, like, yeah, as soon as you have a hater, that lets you know you're on the right track.
Right.
You know, yeah. As soon as someone's kind of going, I don't like Anthony, what he's doing now. Anthony always, okay, cool. That I'm definitely doing something good, right? Whatever I've been doing, keep doing that, right? That's kind of what's going on with this country. You know what I'm saying? Oh, we're getting, you guys are liberals. Oh, you trying to, trying to get equality. Who wants that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we got the haters. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes the haters dominate the news cycle. It's, people like to listen to them, right? Real Housewives and whatever else. We give the haters the mic for a little bit, but there's a reason why they're hating.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting too. I never even thought about it, where the fact that we see a divide in the country, it actually means that it's indication that there's a shifting, that there's a country that's trying to get a little better. If there was no divide, it would mean that everybody was on the same page about no movement.
We tried that, right? Like, that's kind of the 90s, right? The late 80s. We were kind of like comfortable with like a little bit of progress,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're like a little bit, like let's and racism is so taboo. Let's not racism.
Yeah.
Let's just keep that under this. But none of the night show hosts, you guys have Arsenio. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? You guys, the newscasters and you can have the weather guy,
The sports guy.
And then, slowly things start to change, and then people get more uncomfortable, right? And that is going to, you're going to see that, right? When people get uncomfortable, they're going to kind of maybe move in the opposite direction a little bit, where before they were, okay, as long as things are, if someone has at least the comfort zone, whether subconsciously or consciously, that they're comfortable with a mostly white country that's kind of dominated by a lot of the thoughts and the environment they grew up in, that told them that all of the heroes in this country were white, and everyone who was founding and the fathers and the this and that were of this, of Western European descent, then, as you start to see the country shift toward Latin Americans and Indian Americans and African Americans, and, you might get, there's some people that might get a little uncomfortable with that, and that might shift them from where before they didn't mind their Indian neighbors and they didn't mind now they're going, oh, but the Indian neighbors are now trying to run stuff. That's different, if that makes sense, right? Like, so the same people that maybe before were okay with them, in the communities, and where they're kind of comfortable with the keep your distance, but I'm cool. Now all of a sudden, now you're running for office. It's like, hold up, lock the doors, lock the gates, build the wall, and I think you're seeing a little bit of that. You're seeing a little bit of the backlash of positive change, of people trying to get more involved, and that's going to make people that are used to the way the country used to look pretty uncomfortable.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. So my channel is Epowerment LLC, and the slogan, my motto is, life is not about shade, it's about light. In the Bible, it talks about how God created light and darkness together, but then he separated, right? And that was indication to me that we can't live with darkness. We have to walk separate. So my channel is all about just having positive conversation that hopefully shift people's mindset, give them something to think about. So that's where we're going to end off. I want to know, just as a young man living in this country, at Yale, all this business stuff, all this great stuff you're doing, what empowers you?
Wow. I think that the one thing that kind of drives me is knowledge, access to knowledge, and education. You could take all your money away, right? They could take all your clothes, any possessions can be taken from you. Knowledge is yours.
Wow.
Right? Knowledge is yours. It cannot be taken away from you. And there's something very powerful about that, right? There's something very powerful about the accumulation of knowledge, the ability to kind of work with that and reason with that makes you, deeper in so many ways, but also just, gives you something that the world, that no one else can take away. And I think that's powerful. And whatever field that is, right? Like if you're an astrophysicist, right? Or if you're or whatever it is, the field of your study, right? Because it doesn't have to, if it's cars, right? If you're a great mechanic, right? And people do this, right? People perfect their job, and you can go anywhere, right? Yeah, like if you're a great mechanic, you can move any state you want to. Why? Because you always got a job. Why? Because you know what you're doing, right? And that no one can take that away from you, right? Oh, you get fired from your garage, or you get in a tiff with the owner. Fine. Now I'm going to go to a new garage. Why? Because my skills can't get taken from me. They can take my tools. They can take all this other stuff, but my knowledge is mine. So there's something very powerful about that. Accumulate knowledge, build your stuff. You can be a jack of many trades, right? But build your knowledge, deepen it. It can never be taken away from you.
Wow, that's good. That's good. That's so good. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Many blessings, brother.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Once again, you can follow us at Epowerment LLC on Instagram. Those of you who are watching this, comment. I want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your thoughts. Like this post, share this post, all that good stuff. I love you so much for watching. Thank you for being with me tonight. And we'll have another conversation next week. Have a great day.